It's the end of the year and the start of a fresh one, and you know what that means. Top 10 lists! Yeah! Which is absolutely not what I'm going to be doing here. Listen, I'm just going to assume most of you know what was good and what was bad in 2023, and instead of running down the same type of numbered list that contains, you know, the usual suspects like Baldur's Gate 3, Alan Wake 2, Tears of the Kingdom, Hi-Fi Rush, although that last one is criminally underplayed, please play Hi-Fi Rush, but instead, I'd like to give my big recommends for some smaller titles that I really enjoyed this year, but that I also feel weren't talked about nearly as much as they deserve to be. This is also not going to be in any order that denotes quality. It's roughly chronological, I guess, because I don't know. I just don't think it's beneficial to rank them because they're all winners in my heart. Aww. So, without further ado, let's talk about the best games not enough people played in 2023. The first one I'd like to talk about came out in January, so while I understand some of you may have forgotten about it, that still won't stop me from judging you over such a faux pas. Coming from Joy Masher, the makers of Oniken, Odalis, and Blazing Chrome, Moonrider is a brilliant homage to the likes of Shinobi, Ninja Gaiden, and Hagane, but also manages to do just enough to be its own thing. Its dark, futuristic setting is brought to life through its vivid pixel art, which is on display in every gruesome biomechanical boss detail, the visceral splashes of crimson, or the dazzling scrolling effects seen in its later stages. Along with its visuals, its gameplay is an incredibly tight and satisfying action affair that's challenging while also being fair to the player. When you die in Moonrider, you die due to your own bumbling movements, of which I have plenty, and not crappy respawning enemies or impossible jumps, so never feel too frustrated even if you're losing a lot of lives. Fortunately, you can help avoid that through the multitude of new powers you get via swapping in new chips whenever the situation calls for them. There's honestly very little to complain about with this Vengeful Guardian, maybe aside from it being pretty short, but it's also a retro homage, so you can't really hold that against it. It's available on absolutely everything and runs rock solid on the Switch to boot, so you can't go wrong with any version. If you'd like to check out a more in-depth look at all this glorious action, do head on over to my gameplay channel where I experience all of Moonrider's slashy-washy fun for the first time. Ottimo trabalho, Joy Masher. Okay, so yeah, Dredge is a fairly well-known game from earlier this year, so while it's not all that obscure/ignored, I still can't say enough good things about it. If you're not familiar and want the elevator pitch, it's an open-world fishing game with just a dash of Lovecraftian horror. Your amnesia-riddled sailor finds himself stranded in a particularly mysterious corner of the ocean, and is basically forced to pay for repairs to the ship they ran ashore in. As you continue to harvest the sea, you encounter increasingly more sinister situations, characters, and creatures. But fortunately, you can use the cash you earn from selling fish to power up your boat with different rods, lighting rigs, and engines. The story kept me engaged throughout, but whenever there was any downtime, I got really hooked into catching as many exotic fish species and their associated ghoulish mutations I could find. But even with that effort, I didn't get close to discovering all 151 types. This made the experience of playing Dredge very addicting, as exploring every few miles of open water would reveal a new mystery to solve or upgrade to collect. This is one of those games I wish I could delete from my mind so I could experience all over again, with its only negatives being a shorter than I would like day and night cycle, the lack of voice acting, which I really felt would have enhanced the stellar writing, and that neither of the two possible endings were particularly satisfying to me. I get having one that's mysterious and leaves itself open to the imagination, but they're both kinda handled like that, so I would have personally preferred one that was a bit more definitive. If you enjoy horror-like atmospheres and doing repetitive but addicting tasks a la Animal Crossing, I can't recommend Dredge enough. It's out on every platform, so you have no excuse to put on your rain slicker and brave its dark seas. Maybe this is just me, but I kinda get the vibe that some people forgot a Prime Remastered came out this year. Like, huh? Oh, but did it that come out in like December of 2022 or something? Which I guess could be chalked up to the fact that Nintendo stealth dropped this after literal years of rumors saying it was a thing. Thankfully, unlike some other Nintendo remasters, Metroid Prime got the love and attention it deserves, which in turn saw me enjoying and beating it over the course of a week or two after uploading the first few hours onto YouTube. While it doesn't have any huge new tweaks or additions and remains a very faithful remaster, the little things that were added, like the additional control options as well as the bonus art content, are nonetheless appreciated. I think its graphical overhaul is also one of the better handled ones in recent memory, not going overboard and utilizing the moderate power of the Switch to apply simple but attractive new effects and lighting. This makes the game world so much slicker while still retaining the feel of the GameCube original. If you've never experienced a Metroid Prime before, then this is absolutely the one to start with. The only negative I can think of in regards to this one is that it acknowledged but didn't actually list the original dev team members behind the 2002 release in the credits. But you know, it can't be a Nintendo thing without one aspect being weird and outdated, I guess. Still though, incredible work from all the parties involved that made this one happen. It took a long time to get there, but was well worth sitting through dozens of Nintendo Directs without it ever being announced. On Garde is probably one of the most wholesome, warm, and inviting games I've played all year, and it's all about attacking people with swords, knocking them into the ocean, and blowing up old ladies. This released exclusively on Steam a few months back, and very few people are talking about it, which is a shame because at its core, it's that rare 6th generation style experience. No roguelike mechanics, no online modes, no crafting. You just swashbuckle your way through a level-based Zorro-like adventure, cutting down an army of hired goons that you can take on mano a mano with simple but satisfying swordplay and environmental trickery. Graphically, it has this pleasant, whimsical look that is achieved through its very strong art direction, but it also has stellar sound, music, and voice acting, which do a lot to highlight its charming world. The challenge is there too, as every level presents more and more obstacles and expands upon the combat by always introducing new mechanics, never letting things get too stale as you parry, leap, and bound your way to victory. Now, it should be noted there's not a ton of replay value here, which might be on Garde's biggest fault, but all 5 hours of it is filled with enough action and snappy dialogue that it never drags. Would be cool if someone could mod Puss in Boots in here eventually. Street Fighter 6, Mortal Kombat 1, yeah, who cares? The real fighting game MVP of 2023 was of course Pocket Bravery, which actually launched with just as much content as the other two, while refraining from having any type of microtransactions or real-world premium currency. Coming to us from the very talented Statera studio, Pocket Bravery mixes together the look of Neo Geo Pocket games, tried-and-true SNK-style mechanics, and an eclectic roster you typically don't see in a lot of other button bashers. There's a cutscene heavy story mode that centers around the main character, the traditional arcade ladder with unique endings, simple and pro control options, online rollback enabled multiplayer, a ton of unlockable colors with some very deep cuts, and the intriguing Combo Factory, which really lets you explore the ins and outs of its systems. Speaking of systems, Pocket Bravery has all the modern depth you'd expect, but nothing is too overwhelming either, which is smart because that choice helps you focus on its unique elemental system without too much distraction. If other fighters haven't quite scratched that itch for you, definitely give Pocket Bravery a chance. It's out on Steam right now, with console versions coming in the first half of 2024. And honestly, any game that has a guest character from Breakers gets the biggest of ups from me. I was blown away with Homebody when I played it on my second channel in October, because what starts as a fairly typical indie horror game in the opening few minutes very quickly changes into something way more intriguing and unnerving. It's always really effective when you take familiar settings or characters but then introduce a twist or mechanic that completely turns things on its head, and Homebody does this perfectly while still retaining all the expected scares and atmosphere that horror fans have come to expect. I don't want to get too much into the story story, so I won't, but the basic premise is that you play as a member of a circle of friends who are meeting up for the weekend at a cabin to watch a comet, which is always an invitation for trouble. With anxieties already pretty high due to some interpersonal drama, things get much worse with the introduction of a crazed killer and a bunch of mind-bending puzzles. But really, that's not even the half of it. It's out now on every single platform, so if your interest has been sufficiently piqued, turn off the lights and get ready for a frighteningly good time. I'm pretty sure a good portion of you have at least heard about Sea of Stars, especially since it won Indie Game of the Year at the Please Wrap It Up Awards. But I can in good conscience leave it out of such a list, cause not nearly enough people have played this gorgeous send-up to classic 90s RPGs. While Sabotage did a great job with their previous effort The Messenger, I always found that game's writing to be its secret weapon, as it felt very genuine and charming, so logically the prospect of a whole RPG bursting with more of that was up my alley, and Sea of Stars didn't disappoint. While the two primary protags, Valere and Zale, do have a pretty familiar hero template in their motivations and attitudes, the colorful cast of side characters like Teeks, Valtrade, Sarai, and my beloved Garle thankfully fill things out with some extra fun and quirkiness. While I felt the story was pretty engrossing, like a lot of RPGs, it does take a while to really get going, but even during its more mundane moments, you are constantly assaulted by absolutely stunning pixel art and an equally breathtaking soundtrack. I mean, this is some all-time classic stuff right here. I do have to be honest though, the turn-based combat and puzzles don't really do much to dramatically differ itself from the many classics that Sea of Stars is inspired by, but sometimes that's okay. You don't have to constantly be innovating to still be fun. You can expect to spend somewhere around 30 hours exploring this magical world, which to me is best done in a warm, cozy bed with a controller in your hand. Congrats on all your success, Sabotage. You guys absolutely deserve it. While I had a great time skating, tricking, and tagging in the first few hours of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk that I uploaded onto Flophouse Plays, I didn't expect to be surprised and shocked at its story developments, but I nonetheless was. While vibrant graphics and a phenomenal soundtrack were an absolute given since this was made by Team Reptile, I actually found myself getting attached to a few of the characters, which is an unexpected but welcome plus. But whenever I was grinding and nodding my head to the stellar music, I had this overwhelming feeling where I was just going, damn, they really don't make them like this anymore. Hell, I don't even 100% trust Sega to do it right anymore. And while Cyberfunk isn't perfect, some of its mission structure and map design feel a little off and the combat isn't super satisfying, the bulk of what you're doing is still so effortlessly cool and fun that I'm able to let those small issues slide. It's another game that's out on absolutely everything and even has a boxed physical version if that helps seal the deal. But let's be honest, the music should have already done that by itself. Now this next recommendation is going to be a 2-for-1 since, I'm going to be frank here, both games are pretty damn similar. Blasphemous 2 is of course the sequel to Blasphemous. The game was so much religion-themed edgelord lore that even Vati Video wouldn't touch it with a flaming 30-foot spear that's wrapped in barbed wire and coated with the tears of baby skeletons. It does share a lot in common with the first entry, reusing some enemies and animations, but changes up the gameplay by offering our favorite conehead, the Penitent One, a choice of 3 main weapons that are built with their own unique advantages in both combat and traversal. This adds some much needed diversity in the exploration, especially in the early game that I felt Blasphemous 1 lacked. Fortunately, the art, enemy design, music, visceral punchy combat, and challenge remains as effective and as repulsive as ever, but I do have to say, as much as I enjoyed its macabre world, I would hope that the Game Kitchen moves on to something else for their next title. Now, if Blasphemous' setting could be considered Demons or Dark Souls-like, then The Last Faith, which released about a month ago, is very clearly the Bloodborne. While the moment-to-moment gameplay is really similar, you're a 2D badass killing hordes of horrific enemies through a giant interconnected map, The Last Faith presents a more digestible story, complete with a set hero named Eric, who you can then customize even further via a class system. You can also wield dozens of different armaments like swords, axes, and knives, and also a number of devastating spells. It might play a little jankier than Blasphemous, and its sound quality is kind of all over the place, but I dug the vibe and atmosphere of The Last Faith just a little more, especially this hot mommy right here, Tachimachi. I'm sure she's not a horrible ghoul, the weird monster face under there. Both these games are available on every console and PC, and if you'd like to check out more footage, then hit the links in the description below. I sincerely wish that arcade-style racers will eventually get their boomer shooter moment where you can't finish a sentence before another one is announced or released, because right now, the fanbase are only managing to just get by with a handful of releases. Fortunately, Horizon Chase 2 is absolutely one of the best examples of the genre I've played in quite a while, even though it doesn't do anything drastically different from the first Chase or its enhanced Turbo Edition in terms of gameplay. The massive graphical overhaul that it's received, however, is more than enough to make it a worthy sequel, going ham with gorgeous, now fully 3D tracks which highlight places you typically don't see in a lot of other racers, like Morocco, Thailand, and even Vermont. Yo, what up, B-Town? The game's sense of speed is also impeccable. There's dozens of unique courses, tons of cars you can customize and upgrade, and well, it's just a blast to play. Right now, it's only available on the Switch and the PC through the Epic Game Store, but PlayStation and Xbox versions are coming next year, and I'll probably be getting one of those as well. Such is the allure of forever chasing the horizon. I've already done a review of Rise of the Dragons on this very channel, but I'm happy to report it's received a number of updates and improvements ever since, including ones I specifically wanted to see, like being able to toggle the food notifications off when scoring multiple KOs, along with several other adjustments. But even before that, I was enjoying my time with this one immensely, buying it on multiple formats because its roguelite structure and progression system obviously lended itself really well to doing multiple runs with different characters and loadouts. This is how Secret Base were able to craft a really addictive Double Dragon experience that felt fresh, while also maintaining the same methodical combat style, and layering in tons of fun references and unlockables, which is a really tall order. While it's tons of fun to play on your own, I highly suggest getting a buddy to play with via couch co-op, because the chaos of having 4 heroes on screen at once, however briefly, via its unique tag system, makes for a special kind of video game madness. While there's already a ton of content to unlock, an online multiplayer update, as well as some other surprises I'm told, are going to be coming in 2024, so be on the lookout for that. But if you don't want to wait for those updates quite yet, then check out the game right now so you can properly live by the code of the dragon! Some of you out there may know of my love for Terminator Resistance, the single best thing to come out of the franchise since 1991, or 2004 rather, because I love you, Redemption. So when that game's developers, Tallon, announced they were working on a Robocop game, I was all like, I'd buy that for $1. Yeah, you knew that was coming. Thankfully, aside from some technical issues I had with the PC demo, the final game was more than worth the wait. Fun writing, lots of quest variety, oodles of robo things to upgrade, a surprisingly gorgeous looking version of Detroit, and a metric fuck ton of nuke to destroy. Now, Tallon still hasn't gotten the hang of making expressive, lifelike character models yet, which, I mean, this works for Murphy, because he looks like that, but it doesn't really work so well for Lewis and a few of the others. And yes, some of the subtext, cinematography, and satire of the original movie isn't nailed here either, but that's almost impossible to achieve some 36 years later in a AA video game. With that said, I feel Tallon got enough of the attitude, violence, and dreary atmosphere of the movies correctly, and at the end of the day, made something that's so entertaining it makes for an easy recommendation from me. If you like Terminator Resistance or a lot of late 6th and early 7th generation games in terms of their design and structure, then Rogue City is totally worth upholding the law for. Also, there's a lot of cats too, so that has to count for something. There's been quite a few retro action games released throughout the year, and one I absolutely have to point out is Gravity Circuit. If you're a fan of Mega Man, and most decent people are, you would enjoy this on one or more levels. From the general story beats to selecting the order of bosses, there's a lot here that's immediately familiar. Where Gravity Circuit starts to differ is in the combat and level traversal, which is fundamentally different from what you'd see in Capcom's franchise. The moment-to-moment combat is actually more melee-focused, punches, combos, and air stomp, and even some juggling attacks, which gives the game a light character action feel. You can then enhance those options further with equipable special moves that play into and complement your moveset in a more organic way, which again is closer to a 2D Devil May Cry than it is Mega Man. Level traversal is done via a cool grappling hook, which lets you cross gaps very quickly and lead into some fun platforming sections, which usually net you a reward that's just off the beaten path. I can, however, totally understand how the game's somewhat limited color palette may not be for everyone, but for me, it's the dialogue that gets a little long-winded. There's just a lot of it, which is also an issue with many later Mega Man, so maybe it's intentional. You can thankfully skip all this dialogue with the push of a button, but personally I'd rather these sections had just been more concise in the first place, because they tend to drone on. Still though, Gravity Circuit looks and plays great and is a godsend for those that are fans of the Blue Bomber, since Capcom isn't really interested in serve-botting that audience anymore. Prison City is the last 2D retro action game I'm recommending, I swear. It was released just a month or two ago, and I think it has gone under most people's radars, which is a shame, especially if you have a love for the old school. Owing a lot to the adventures of Snake Plissken and mixing gameplay influences from the likes of Power Blade, Street Fighter 2010, The Final Fight, Project Vice, and even Metal Gear, it's an impeccably made 2D platformer that's high on both action and challenge. The subtle mechanics underlying the projectile-based combat, coupled with a very customizable difficulty system and often funny dialogue sequences, make for a pretty unique feeling game, despite all those aforementioned influences. This then leads to the inventive, frantic, and often tense boss fights that are one of the game's big high points, as they do a lot to make Prison City feel like one of the most genuine homages to the 8-bit era I've played in recent years. I gotta admit though that I was figuratively pointing out my non-existent hair when I was playing this on video a few weeks back, but thankfully it wasn't that specific rage where you feel something is unfair or poorly designed, but because it was genuinely challenging. Once again, this is available on each and every platform and is also less than $20. So with that, I hereby challenge you all to try and escape this prison city. We end with one of the absolute goats of the gaming industry, Night Dive, who, while having done some fantastic remasters this year like Rise of the Triad and Quake 2, standing above them all is the mighty Turok. You should already be aware of my admiration for the Son of Stone, and here, Night Dive did the impossible by making me finally appreciate his third mainline game, Shadow of Oblivion. It's always shocking to me how just a solid frame rate, redone textures, and proper widescreen support can take something that's pretty mid and prop it up to another level. Turok 3 takes advantage of all these improvements, but Night Dive also saw fit to put even more work in, populating cutscenes with more props and effects, and just making the game look far better in virtually every aspect. All of this was done without the original source code either, since it never got a PC port, so Night Dive had to backwards engineer the N64 original and redo almost everything in their Kex engine, which absolutely paid off. Thanks to that, Turok 3's positives now shine brighter than they ever had before, which is headed up by strong level design, which is neither the giant fog-filled fields of the first, nor the massive multi-section labyrinths of the second. Here, you get tightly designed environments that aren't too simple or too daunting to explore, and while I still prefer the arsenal and enemy design of Turok 2, Shadow of Oblivion was able to make big strides in story, set pieces, and spectacle. These cutscenes and scripted moments are now way easier to appreciate in 2023 than they were in 2000, as they now run in 60 FPS as opposed to the original sub-15 FPS. It's definitely a bit of a letdown that the multiplayer mode wasn't included, but now that all 3 mainline Turok games are available on pretty much everything, all we have to do is patiently await for the Rage Wars. And with that, we conclude my list of great games not enough of you played in 2023, but there's always going to be more. With that said, what underrated titles did you enjoy from the last 12 months? Let me know in the comments below, and if I haven't played them, feel free to admonish me for not doing so. I mean, it's only fair. This was Matt McMuscles, your greasy content lord for the evening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.